Welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast, your home for weekly information and inspiration to help you get the graduate job of your dreams.
Hello, my name is James Curran and welcome to the second episode of the Graduate Job Podcast. This week I speak with careers expert Denise Taylor as we explore the topic of assessment centres. Denise is an award-winning career coach, best-selling author and chartered psychologist, and she shares her experience of how to impress at all aspects of an assessment centre, from the group exercises through to presentations and face-to-face interviews. Having designed and run hundreds of assessment centres over the last 20 years, Denise is able to share some amazing tips that will help you to perform on the big day. A full transcript of the episode and links to everything we discuss can be found in the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com/assessment centres. So without further ado, let's go straight to episode 2.
We're honoured to have with us this week career expert Denise Taylor. Denise is an award-winning career coach, chartered psychologist, and the founder of Amazing People. She's a regular on TV and the radio, author of numerous books, including Now You've Been Shortlisted and How to Get a Job in a Recession, and has over 20 years' experience in helping people to be successful in their job search. Denise, welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast.
And thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. I've given the listeners a brief introduction, but before we dive into talking about assessment centres, would you like to expand on your business and how you became one of the top career coaches in the UK?
Okay, well, as a chartered psychologist, you've got numerous areas that you specialise in. What I've always been fascinated in is about people and about helping people to be at their best. And an area where people struggle is knowing what sort of career to do. They've often had very poor career advice, or they just didn't know what to do, so they made poor choices. So my work seems to be divided up between helping people work out what's the right choice to do, whether they be a 15-year-old thinking of A-levels or somebody who's disappointed that their career as an architect or management consultant hasn't worked out the way they like. And then, of course, there's people who just need they know what they want to do, but they just struggle with how to pass assessment centres, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, excellent. And I know from the research I've conducted with listeners is that assessment centres is certainly one of the areas that people are concerned about. There's a big knowledge gap out there.
Yeah, and I always think assessment centres, it's your place to shine. So that's when I'm talking to people. You've got to think it that way. If you go into the assessment centre with this fear of dread, oh no, it's an assessment centre, then you're not really coming at it from a very positive place. So that's the first thing to do. You've got to look forward to all these chances to shine.
No, definitely. And as you say, you've been shortlisted. Unless the companies think you can do the job, they wouldn't have invited you in the first place.
Absolutely. When I'm working on an assessment centre, all of the people that turn up could conceivably be offered a job, because it's normally for schemes where there's quite a lot of people. So, you're there because we think you can do it and we want the best out of you. So you've just now got to deliver that, really.
So talking at a high level then, so starting at the beginning, what is an assessment centre and why do companies use them?
Many, many years ago, I would always say an assessment centre is not a place, it's an event. And it's still true. It's an assessment centre is your chance, as I said, to shine. And it's where you're not just going to have an interview, but you're going to be able to perform in a number of different ways. So you're going to participate almost always in an interview, almost always in a group exercise. There may be presentations, there may be role plays, there might be psychometric tests to do. So there's a whole range of different things. So it's lots and lots of opportunities. You can't just blow one thing. If one thing you think afterwards, well, it could have been more, you could have done better. Well, that's fine, because you've got another chance to shine in another exercise.
And what are companies looking for from the candidates at an assessment centre?
Well, we're looking for the best person to do the job. And we're looking against competencies. I don't know of a single assessment centre where you're not being assessed against competencies. So one of the things everybody should do as preparation is be clear what competencies are being assessed. I mean, you can guess, but you may get it wrong because different organisations have different focuses. And thinking about the competencies then helps you to think about how you can prepare.
I know there's a wide variety of different assessment centres, but is there always common exercises which candidates will face at each one?
Well, almost always there'll be an interview. Sometimes interviews isn't the best way to gather evidence, but candidates would find it very strange if we just used assessments with never speaking with people. So You will almost always find an interview. You will almost always find a presentation. You will almost always find a group discussion. They're the key things. But there can be some very, very specific things related to a job. I remember working on an assessment centre for one of the telecom companies, and we had people working out how, or demonstrating how they'd respond to angry customers on the phone, which is going to be part of their job. So think about the job that you're applying for, and then any elements of that could be used as part of an assessment centre.
Thinking about the application funnel from the thousands of people that will submit the initial application through to then telephone interviews and aptitude tests and numerical tests, what percentage of people will finally make it through to the assessment centre?
Oh gosh, I don't think I can quite remember that. But I know with some of the assessment centres I'm involved with, in fact one of the major ones, they have literally thousands of applications. And from that, now I'm guessing now, it's based on judgment, but probably only 10% are going to get through to the first stage of the assessment. And that's because an awful lot of people do very, very poor applications. They don't read the instructions, they don't read things properly. I sometimes wonder whether people actually start with a false name just so that they get an idea about what's coming up. I'm not sure, because you often have to give quite a lot of personal information. But some people, I think, they just don't really do a very good application, and they know they're not going to take things forward.
How many people do they tend to be an assessment centre? So if you go along, how many people are you going to be, in effect, competing against?
As a psychologist who's designed literally hundreds of assessment centres, I think six is a really good number to have. But what can often happen is you can have teams of assessors. So, for example, the civil service fast stream, there will be 6 teams of assessors there. So there will be 18 assessors, about 72 candidates, all there on the same day. I think I've got my numbers right. So you could be an assessment centre with masses of people, but in the group that you are part of, then you're probably going to be in a group of 6 or 12, and that's going to be a more realistic number for most assessment centres.
It's a lot less daunting than 70.
Well, but you wouldn't be working within those 72. You'd be within a subgroup of 6.
And how long do they tend to last now? Is it still half a day or a full day or shorter?
Yeah, I think generally we're looking at a day, and and a key tip is if you've had to travel a long distance, do stay the night before. You can stay in a travel lodge or something cheap. I've interviewed people who've said they've set for a London assessment centre who've set off from, say, Leeds at 3 a.m. in the morning. It's like, what were you thinking of? And they haven't performed very well. But generally, they're going to take a day. Now, some assessment centres, not one I specifically have worked on, but others I hear about, or at lunchtime, it's a bit like the X Factor or something. Half of them go home, and they just proceed with the ones that have passed the morning session, which seems a bit tough, but I suppose it's what's right for that organisation.
Moving on to group exercises. Again, I know this is one area that is particularly daunting to candidates, mainly because I don't think they've had the opportunity to practice them in the past. What type of group exercises are the most commonly used at the moment in graduate recruitment? Are people still building towers from paper?
Yes. I mean, I remember doing that with and not just with graduates. And the reason we get people to do things like that is because we're just thinking about how people work effectively as a team. But it's a bit false. It's not the sort of thing that you're likely to do. So often we'll set people on a task related to the job. So if somebody's looking for a communications job, it's maybe how you would put how you would put something together related to that. So how you would put a short internal video together and get people working on something. So it could be something to do with that. It could be something that we call assigned roles. So everybody gets a brief to prepare in advance, and you go in there as working from some department. So you have to be able to use your brief rather than just the information that you've got in your head. You're probably not going to know in advance what the assessment centre is going to be about, although I think there's various websites like Student Room that should be able to provide some information from people that have recently gone through. But you've just got to be ready for anything that you're thrown. key thing with a group exercise is you need to speak up. And, not everybody's highly extrovert. Some people are quite quiet. But you can have masses of good ideas, but if you don't speak up, me as an assessor wouldn't know about these ideas in your head. So you have to speak up, and you probably have to speak up more than you would normally. But equally, you don't want to take over, because just speaking and trying to come across well yourself at the expense of other people, well, as assessors, we don't like that either.
I know when I've been an assessor in group exercises, as you mentioned, there's been candidates that I've been looking at, and they've not said a word in the entire 45 minutes or half hour. And how can you give them marks to go through if they don't speak?
No, and you can't make a judgment. Some assessment centres will get people to review their performance afterwards, but still, saying, "Oh, I wish I'd said this," is not actually giving us as assessors evidence, because that's what we're doing, whether we're looking at the group exercise, a role play, an interview. We're gathering evidence that we can compare against our competency framework. So you need to provide information for us to be able to make a judgment.
What are the roles that people can take on in the group exercise to make sure that they get noticed?
I mean, something I always used to do, because I've been through masses of assessment centres as a candidate myself, and I was very shy when I was younger, but I could write neatly, so I would often offer to be the scribe and to write things at the flip chart. So if that's a possibility, and you write neatly, and you're good at listening and summarising, that's something you could do, because as you're saying, can I just confirm that this is what you want me to capture? At least you're speaking up. The other thing is to take on a timekeeping role. There's often a stopwatch on the table or there's a clock around the room. But if you do it, you have to do it properly. So many of the time, somebody says, "I'll be the timekeeper," and then they never give a time check. So again, it's something that it's good because it's a role that you can play. Now, you might not want to be at the flip chart because you feel like you can't contribute. So you've got to think about what plays best to your strengths. But always thinking about people that are quieter, at least that's a good thing that you can do. But also, you get the people in a group exercise, and you've probably noticed this yourself, that are very keen to speak up. And they forget about everybody else in the group exercise. So what we need to do is if you find that somebody's doing that, you can say something like, "Well, we've heard a lot about you, but what about some of the more quieter people?" Even if you're one of the more quieter people yourself, you could say, like, "Denise, what's your views? We've not heard much about what you've had to say." And then, then you're bringing in somebody who might be even quieter than you are.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point about the scribe. I always find that that's a really good role to take on, because you then tend to be stood up whilst everybody else in the group is sat down. So you almost naturally just develop more of a dominant position, and you can start then to bring in other people.
Yeah.
No, sorry, I didn't catch that. What was that? Or did I capture this? What you said correctly? And as you said, you can naturally adopt the role of bringing in the quieter members of the team to say, "Oh, Barry, what's you've not mentioned much. What do you think about this?"
Absolutely, and some assessment centres, it's quite complex, the topics that's discussed, and you might feel a bit overwhelmed by the amount of data. So if you're more facilitative, the assessors will probably notice that it's less on content and more on process, but it still means that you're getting quite a lot of airtime out there. And people will look at you as a more of a leadership position. And at that point, but you need to take it on. And so when you find out that James isn't saying very much, James is taking over, it's a bit like, "James, we keep hearing your point of view, and we know you've got lots of good ideas, but shall we just hear what everybody else has got to say?" And that's quite a good thing about being a bit more assertive as well.
Definitely, and I like your point about the timekeeper. I think I've seen that quite a few times. People are told to, go in and adopt the role of the timekeeper. So they fight to say, "I'll be the timekeeper," but then it's somebody else who says, "Hey guys, we've got 5 minutes left. Should we actually try and answer the question?"
Yeah, and I think for everybody in a group exercise, write down the time. I know a lot of people don't wear watches now, and going to assessment centre, do dig your watch out, because you can't keep looking at your phone, because often they ask you to turn them off, but you've got to keep on pressing it to get the time to come up. So dig out your retro watch from your drawer and write it down so that even if somebody is keeping track of time, they might not be doing a very good job, and at least you can see how things go. So, for example, if the exercise is 50 minutes for the group exercise, then if they're still talking about process and how they're going to work after 10 minutes, it's like, we need to move on. So just because somebody has said that they're going to do the timekeeping role, you don't have to rely on them. You can demonstrate some capabilities with that as well.
You mentioned talking over people as a trait that people shouldn't be doing. Are there any other common pitfalls that people need to avoid?
So don't overtalk is one. Speak up is another one. Keep focused on the task, because I think there's the over-talking and then there's just speaking. You know, I don't want to hear a load of stuff that isn't adding value to the group exercise, because as an assessor, it's like, well, what was the point of that? Yes, lots of airtime, but it wasn't very relevant. So what you say should be relevant. And again, that's something that you can do with saying to other people, saying, oh, I'm not quite sure how that relates to the topic that we're discussing. Perhaps you could let us know. So that's a good way to tackle it when somebody else is just saying too much. But also monitor your own performance. Now, I know I'm saying there's an awful lot that you've got to be doing. So, and if you're not the sort of person that's had much experience of getting involved in groups, and has this theory about a group exercise, we'll look about how you can practice. Think about when you're at university and the groups that you've been involved with, and start treating that in a bit more of a slightly formalised way, where you act as if you're at a group exercise. And maybe, if you're playing rugby and you go along to committee meetings, again, that you speak up and you start pretending that you're in a group exercise. Well, you are in a group discussion, but start, talking about bringing other people in, because that's going to help you to feel more relaxed about what's coming up.
Definitely. So moving on to presentations. What sort of presentations can a candidate be expected to make?
Well, there's generally two styles of presentations, and one of them is where you're told in advance and then you can prepare, and the other is where you get maybe 30 minutes notice to prepare. The ones where you've been told in advance and you can bring everything along, I expect it to be completely slick. I expect it, if it's a 10-minute presentation, I want it to be finished very, very close to 10 minutes. And whatever the time limit is, I'm going to cut you off if you go over, so you do need to practice that. Now, we're a lot more forgiving when you've only been given 30 minutes to prepare. People will often come in with their notes, which is generally fine. But I think rather than write it out verbatim and read it out, what you need is the key things that you want to say, and to say that. And do get an idea about time. I'm looking for content. I'm also looking for structure. So if you've got a 10-minute presentation, then you can have, a minute and a half on setting the scene, thinking of a minute and a half at the end to close things down, and think about the time in between, or the 4 points that you need to make, and how you should allocate your time. A bit like when we prepare for writing an essay. Think about the time that you've got, and then as you do your presentation, you can make good use of your time, because I'm going to down-mark you if you stop in 3 minutes when you have 10 minutes to go.
No, I definitely agree. And you mentioned the presentations need to be slick. I know if people are, say, bringing in PowerPoint slides or have been asked to prepare an accompanying deck to go with it, I've got high expectations in terms of how I expect them to look, whether it's using the company branding on the slides, because the people who will be assessing you will more likely be people who work at the firm and are used to dealing with PowerPoint, etc. all day, so they'll have a high standard of what they expect them to look like.
Absolutely, and the branding, really key. If you're going to the NHS, get the NHS logo up there. They're blue, so you use blue as well. Do these things that give them a subtle idea about how you are. And often, I know when I was doing those sorts of things, if you have your first slide as if you're a member of the organisation, so they're beginning to see how you fit in. My big bugbear with watching presentations is when people just read out the bullets on the slide. Your slides are not your crib. They are there to enhance what it is that you have to say. And when people are putting up pictures and then they're talking around the image, I'm quite impressed by that one. I do not want people just to read out bullets. Having said that, when you're doing it on the day with a very limited amount of time, then you're going to have bullets, because you're going to have to refer things to. Quick tip is if you're if they're still doing it with paper, I haven't seen. Actually, I have seen paper presentations recently. Is you can write things on in pencil and then you can write in flip chart pen over the top of it. So there are things like that, but generally, it's all done online now, so that and make sure you can use the technology. Gosh, yeah. When you struggle and you don't know how to put your pen drive in, or you can't get it the right size, you should know these sorts of things. Organisations use PowerPoint. Even if you're a Mac user, you make sure that you can use PowerPoint.
And always bring plenty of paper copies on the day, just in case there's a power cut or the computer stops working.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's if you're bringing it in advance. It's when you're preparing on the day, and you might not get that. But you should. It's always nice when you can go in advance to bring things that you can hand out to people, not necessarily all the slides, but like the equivalent of a handout that you would do to leave behind if you were making a presentation. That's a nice touch as well.
So moving on to interviews, what sort of interviews will graduates most likely face?
I do think it's going to be a competency-based interview. So I'm going to talk about competencies now, but in all these other exercises, we're not just making judgments on this is the process, this is the content. It's all related to competencies. So it's not going to be what do you think of this or what's your view of that one. What we're looking for is examples about how you've done things in the past. So can you give me an example about when you've demonstrated drive? Can you give me an example about when you've had to be flexible because you've had limited resources? So think about these examples in advance. Most people know about STAR, which is situation, task, action and result, but they don't always do what they know. I mean, there's different acronyms, but basically we need to understand a specific example about how you've done something and what the end result was. That's how I coach my clients to do. At some of the assessment centres I go to, that's what I'll say as part of my introduction. I'm going to be looking for a specific example, and I tell them what I'm looking for, just as a reminder. And then they don't do it. They go, oh, well, when I'm working with people, and it's all this general stuff that comes back. It's not specific. It's not really addressing the question that I've asked. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to be performing well. You should find out what the competencies are you're going to look for. And if it's a particular organisation and one of the competencies is commercial awareness, then you need to think about how you can demonstrate that. You can't just say, well, I'm just out of uni, I've never had to. Well, think about the part-time work that you've had. Think about some of the assignments you've done. Think about some internships or voluntary work. You need to be able to provide an answer and an example. You can't just say, no, I haven't got that, because it's not really coming across as very, you're not coming across as very well if that's how you respond. And believe me, people say that frequently. Sorry, I don't really have an example about that one. Well, duh. That's you a quarter down on the interview now.
And as you said, the companies aren't shy about promoting what their values or competencies are. They're normally front and centre in the middle of the application page online.
Yes, because generally when you're applying online, you're having to give examples as part of the application process, so you should know what they are. And you can use the same examples. Sometimes people say to me, I've already used this one on my application form, can I use it again? Well, of course you can. I haven't got your application. I'm not comparing what you've written on your application. And the application was to get you to interview or the assessment centre. Now, yes, please, you can use that again. And also you can take the same example, such as a part-time job that you had, and you can use that to demonstrate working as part of a team, dealing with problems, showing resilience. It can all relate to the same example. It's not that you can only use a particular thing once.
What would be the top 3 tips that you give candidates for how to ace an interview?
The first thing is answer the questions. Listen. I mean, honestly, it's the key one. Listen and answer the questions. And what am I going to do through it? I don't know. Listen to the question. Make sure you answer it. Prepare examples in advance. And at the end, when they say to you, "Have you got any questions?" Don't just say, "Well, you seem to have answered everything." It's such a weak ending. Ask questions and avoid things like, what sort of holidays are there? How much do you pay? What sort of development are you going to do? I want you to ask me questions about the organisation that you're applying to. What are some of the key challenges that are facing the organisation? Read things about the organisation. If you're applying to go onto a supermarket scheme, goodness, there's been so much in the news today as we're recording this, so you might want to say, Morrison's decision to price match against Little and Aldi, if you're going for the Morrison graduate scheme, what impact is that going to have on the business bottom line? It shows that you're paying attention to what's in the news.
As you said, I think listening to the actual question is such a key one, because so many times you ask someone a question and they answer with, well, thank you for your question, but here's something that I want to tell you about.
No, they think they're trainee politicians, and it's not clever. And even if you don't know the answer, it's best to say something like, well, actually, I don't have an example of having dealt with a difficult customer. And that's an interesting question, because I've often wondered about that, because other people I talk to always seem to be having to deal with that situation. And I think what it is I'm the sort of person that listens to customers and always wants to do a good job. So we never reach a point where they are difficult, because I can respond well. So for an example, if when a customer comes to me and they've got a query, this is how I deal with it. And then maybe to say at the end, now I know that wasn't addressing your question about dealing with a difficult customer, because, I think I've been lucky because my customers aren't difficult. But actually, I don't think it is luck. I think it's about the way I've always handled customers. Something like that I'd probably be quite impressed about that. And I might come back and you say, really? Have you never had a difficult customer? Well, what sort of customers are the most challenging that you've had to deal with? What are the ones that have tested your personal responses? So, assessors will sometimes come back. It's not just we ask a question, you speak, and then we ask the next question. We're going to test you out a bit as well.
Thinking back to when I went through the process, I know for a fact that I answered, when I was asked if I had any questions at the end, I know I said, actually, yeah, I think you've answered them all.
Yeah.
So I've fallen foul of some of your what not to do already.
I think what I think is really good, James, is to actually write some questions down in advance. So I think if you write things down in advance, and then literally you've got them written down, either because you don't want them on your iPad, you've got to find it in a bag, but a woman would probably have them in a handbag, easy to pull out. You might have it in your jacket pocket. But say, I came up with 8 questions. Open it up and say, you've answered 7 of them. The one question that you haven't answered is, and then on the very rare occasion where you have answered them all, they have answered them all, you can say, like, well, I came up with 5 questions and you've answered them all. Look, here they are. And sort of make it as a bit of a joke thing.
No, that's a really good point. How can a candidate ensure that they are in the correct frame of mind on the day itself?
I think it's in all sorts of situations that you want to think about this one. What I think is a really good idea, if you drive there or if you've got on the train, is as you get out of the car, as you get out of the train, it's think like, right, I'm really or it's usually the hotel room, I'm really looking forward to this. So tell yourself you're going to enjoy it. This is my great opportunity to demonstrate just how well I can do this job. So self-talk, that's what athletes do. That's what you need to do, is to think about that. And at various points, you may well find other candidates that are playing games, and they're going to big themselves up and try and put you down to try and get some psychological advantage. Just ignore them. So if you're going to talk about general topics. Don't talk about assessment centres. And if somebody starts going on about how brilliant they are, just think, that person's feeling quite nervous because they're trying to put me down. So just let it gloss over. You could take a book to read so that you can refer to that. What can be quite useful is, go to the loo and as you're in a private room, you can sort of look in the mirror and go like, I'm going to enjoy this. I mean, you can do it silently if you're in your head as well. But I think sometimes it can be just like, just walk outside, go to the loo, and just say, yep, I am. I'm going to enjoy this. For the next 40 minutes, I'm going to show how great I can be at the interview, the role play, the presentation, whatever it is that you've got going on. And then when it ends, if something hasn't gone well, just like, you know what? I did well on all these different areas. Just don't focus on the one question that you screwed up. Think about the 5, 6 questions that you did do well, and then think, you know what? It's over. The written exercise is coming up next. I'm going to do something a bit... I'm going to go into that one feeling great again. And if you can't stop yourself thinking about it, pinch yourself. Something like that's going to break the negative thoughts in your head and make you feel a bit better for the next thing.
I liked your comment in the book about not trying to be somebody else, but just trying to be a really good version of yourself.
Oh, gosh. So many people, it's like, who are you pretending to be? I think it's not just now in midlife about being authentic. I think if you try and be somebody that you're not, and you get the job, you've got to carry on being that person forever. How hard is that going to be? So the more you're clearer about who you are, where your strengths lie, then the better able it is to be you rather than pretend to be somebody else. One
final thing. So at the end of the assessment centre, an interesting thing from your book, Now You've Been Shortlisted, was you recommend writing a thank you note to the assessors.
Because not many people do. And it's not always possible because you don't always know who. But if you've normally got some information with the people's names, so when you get home, drop an email or get something in the post if it's going to arrive the next day, just saying about how much you enjoyed meeting them, reinforcing some of the things that you did well. If you sort of didn't do so great in a particular area, you could say, I know I fluffed that question. Going back, I thought about such and such. Now, it's not always going to be taken into account because often as assessment centres, we're doing the wash-up that night, so decisions are already made. And sometimes it works better with smaller organisations, but it can still work with larger organisations when they're not making a decision there and then, but it's something that's being done, at the end of the whole assessment centre. You're not going to lose anything out by doing it. It might not make a difference, but it might. So, why not do it?
Definitely. Denise, we've reached the end of our time together this morning. Thank you for your time. You've given the listeners a treasure trove of brilliant advice there on assessment centres. So before we close, what is the best way for people to reach out to you and what you do?
Okay. Well, my website is amazingpeople.co.uk. Come and look on my website. It's a big site, but it's got lots of information there about all the services I offer. And there's a number of free programs that you can sign up for as well, including 5 days to get a job faster and a 7-day program when you need help in thinking about what is it I want to do. And there's over 1,000 items on the blog, so there's plenty there to keep you going if you've got nothing else to do with your time. But yeah, if you think I can help them, then please get in touch.
Thank you, Denise. All those details will be in the show notes on the website. So, Denise, thank you again for appearing on the Graduate Job Podcast.
Okay, and thanks for inviting me. Bye-bye.
Many thanks again to Denise for sharing so many insights into the inner workings of assessment centres. I know from first-hand experience that there can be daunting events, but with the correct preparation, there can be places where you can shine. My personal top 3 takeaways from the episode were, firstly, the need to ensure that you listen and then actually answer the questions that you're being asked, which is more difficult than you might think. Secondly, that you ensure you're in a positive frame of mind walking in on the day itself, and you actually believe that you can get the job. And thirdly, to drop them a thank you note after the event itself. You never know, it could make all the difference. The full transcript of today's episode can be found on the website at graduatejobpodcast.com/assessment centres. And please do get in touch via Twitter as well at gradjobpodcast. And finally, please leave a review on iTunes. I read everyone and it's great to hear your feedback. Do join us next week when we have best-selling author Richard Morn sharing his 3 secrets to finding a job. I hope you enjoyed the episode today, but more importantly, I hope you use it and apply it. See you next week.